Two friends, Alan Dale and Jerry Carew, who grew up just a few streets apart in St. John's East End, have been separated by Canada's geography for 3 decades. They came together virtually during the pandemic to chat about like-minded interests. Alan lives in PEI and Jerry in Newfoundland. Thriving in remoteness has been a common theme for both of them during the pandemic. Gale Force Winds, the podcast is the result.
And welcome to another edition of Gale Force Winds. I'm Alan Dale, and with me as always, my good buddy from the East End of St. John's, Jerry Carew. How are you, Jerry?
Alan, I am doing very well. We are into our 4th hour of recording. So for those that don't know, we record these and then post them a day, a week later, whatever, depending on how many we have recorded. Today's been an exciting day because of the 20th anniversary of September 11th and the impact that had worldwide, and particularly the impact it had here in Newfoundland. I remember things very vividly, and hopefully we'll get into that. But we have Elias Kanaris on, who is, in my reading of what his life has been and has been because of 9/11. I'm really excited, Alan, to just dig into it. So I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to you.
100%, Jerry. I'm very excited about it too. Of course, September 11th, 20 years ago, was a pivotal moment, not only for ourselves and our guests, but globally. I believe it really was. The world changed on that day. Things got a little bit more complicated, but during that, good things happened as well. There's positive stories and positive messages that came out of it, and people reconnected. And I think it taught us all a little bit about how we treat one another through harsh times and things. So there's good things come out of it as well. And I'm looking forward to diving into some of that. So, Elias, without further ado, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Alan, Jerry, thank you for having me and hosting me on your show. It's a pleasure. Greetings, Morena, as we say here in New Zealand. Good morning from Auckland, New Zealand. Some say, where is New Zealand? I say, we are as far east as you can go. If you don't take care and you go too fast, you'll fall off the edge of the world. So we are sending you greetings from the edge of the world all the way back to Newfoundland.
Well, that's wonderful. So, Elias, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you coming from? What makes you tick?
So, I was born in North Africa, a small country that you might have heard of, you might not have heard of, called Libya. It's not a country we publicize too often, but my dad was born in Jerusalem. My mother was born in Bethlehem. Both of them happened to be Greeks, happened to be Christians. But when the state of Israel was formed independently, they left their homeland and ended up meeting and living in Libya, where they got married, started a family. I'm the youngest of 3 kids. And my mum used to remind me as I was growing up that we're from the same tribe as Jesus. No pressure, but, we'll work our way through that. But obviously growing up in Libya was an idyllic lifestyle. Everybody was uncle, auntie, their close family friends. We didn't have social media. FaceTime was literally spending time with somebody else face to face. And it was a lifestyle I loved until 1970, when Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, or Uncle Mo, as we like to call him, came to power, and we had to go and leave Libya and go and live in the UK. So can you imagine 7, 8 years old, having to uproot yourself, go to a new country, learn a new culture, a new accent, a new cuisine? This was all totally and utterly alien to me.
Yeah.
Wow. Tell me about that. So you were 7 years old when you moved to so what did mom and dad do in Libya? So let's start there.
Okay, Dad was a bank officer, and he was always involved in banking since his time in Jerusalem, where he used to work for Barclays Bank. And then eventually when he was in Libya, British Bank in the Middle East, a subsidiary called Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. Mum was an educator. She was a teacher, and she gave up teaching when I came along. I'd say that I was probably too much for her. I don't know, but the youngest of 3. But yeah, Mum was a teacher, Dad was a bank officer, and I was me.
And the other 2 siblings, what are they doing now?
Yeah, my brother works in finance as well. My sister was an educator herself. She used to get involved with younger at-risk kids, here in America. My brother used to work for the oldest Italian bank in New York City. And I've gotten to believe that the most popular product they had there was business loans. The second most popular, though hasn't been confirmed, was probably concrete boots if you didn't pay them back. But I can't confirm that. Just a rumor.
So off you go to the UK at the age of 7. Disruptive, for sure. Tell me about that experience.
I think when you are young, you are resilient by nature. So it was good to be able to go in there. Automatically, I had to learn how to become almost like a Mary Poppins character. All right, Governor, everything all right? Good. And you have to adapt into that whole environment. And I found quite early on, number one, when you're called Elias, it's not a name that's very common. It's more likely to be called Peter or Simon or Roger. Being called Elias, even my family didn't know how to pronounce my name. So they say, are you Elias? Are you Elias? Because Elias is the Greek, Elias is the Hebrew. And eventually they stuck with L. So I became L. So maybe I was ahead of myself even back then, having what could have been just a letter instead of the name.
There you go. That's right, exactly. Or maybe even a symbol at some point. Okay, 7 years old, you're in the UK. Where does life take you then? What do you get involved with?
For me, I was very much into sports. I loved sports. Sports for me sort of blossomed when I watched my very, very first football game, football as in soccer football. Mm-hmm. And the game that they had was at the, I think it was about May 1971. So 1970, we arrived in the UK. By 71, they had the what's called the FA Cup final, the Football Association Cup final. And this was a live event. So we got to sit in front of the TV. Back then, was it color? Maybe, probably still black and white. And my brother, being the older sibling, got to choose of the two teams they're playing. So he chose Liverpool, who were playing that day. And I got the leftovers. I got a team called Arsenal. Well, Arsenal went on to not only win the cup, but they also won the league championship as well. So I was pretty chuffed. 51 years on, I'm still here as a loyal Arsenal fan. And you have to be loyal considering that they haven't won a single game this season so far and are sitting at the very bottom of the table. But hey, loyalty is something that I grew up with and I learned from my parents and from my experience of supporting Arsenal Football Club.
There you go. Go Gunners. Is that what they call them? Gunners? Is that?
Yeah. Oh, I'm impressed.
Alan's showing off now.
Well, it's because they got the cannon right on their logo.
That's
right?
the one.
There you go. So in the UK, where does life take you professionally?
So professionally in the UK, I did my schooling there, went through university, did medical electronics for my master's degree, followed which was preceded by a degree in electrical electronic engineering. And so I went down that sort of engineering pathway, but very, very soon got involved in IT, telecommunications, sales, and I really enjoyed the technical aspect. We were working on a product called the PCC, the Personal Communication Computer. So it was a lovely device. This is by this stage probably the mid 90s. And the PCC, you had a computer at one end, a computer at the other end, you had a phone at each end, and a camera. And then you had some hardware, some software. You used to have a video call with somebody else. You used to have a whiteboard and write things through. This is mid-90s. Wow. The PCC, the Personal Communication Computer, eventually became what we now know as Skype. Right. So it was something that was technology back then, and I loved it. But here's a funny thing, Alan. When I was working for an IT company at the time, working with British Telecom as our partner, I spoke to my boss and I said, John, any chance that I can work out of our training headquarters. They're only about 15 kilometers away from my home. If I have to come into town, it's a 35 to 40 kilometer journey, and it's at least twice or three times the amount of time. He looked at me, he said, Elias, no, I need you in the office. I said, but John, this is technology. We can connect remotely. We can all be there together. And he said, but Elias, you know, all of the business is either done over a cup of coffee or around the water cooler. And he is so right. We're all about people. And I have to keep on reminding myself of the wise wisdom that John gave me, 26, 27 years ago.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that, isn't it? Especially right now when people are they feel that this type of platform can solve all the challenges. It really can't. You need that. We as humans, we need that connection. We need to look into people's eyes. We need to feel the cadence of their conversation in a business setting, and it's a connection that we need. And while this is an interesting platform, and what you were working on back then was an interesting platform, John was absolutely right. It does not replace that need for us to to shake hands and to shake hands. That's even a complicated thing right now. Yeah. But that interaction that we have, and couldn't agree with him more. He was a bit of a visionary back then, even working on this type of technology. So did this work in the technology field send you traveling around the world, or were you pretty much confined to the UK?
I've been very blessed that my family are based all over the world. So even though we started off in Libya, went to the UK, my brother and sister live in the States. I have family who are in Canada, in Argentina. And then I decided, you know what, time for me to move on. And I went, of all places, to New Zealand, the other end of the world. Can you think about this? London, England, all the way to, Auckland, New Zealand. Could I get any further away? It was interesting. I had no idea what New Zealand was like. All I knew was my parents, when I was younger, had traveled to Australia and New Zealand as part of a world tour and a cruise that they went on. And they brought back some artifacts. There was a boomerang, some other mementos from New Zealand, which used to hang up on my wall. So every night when I went to sleep, I used to see them. In the morning, waking up, I saw them. And I guess there was planted since an early age, the concept of coming down under. And I'm glad I did that. I've been blessed. My work has taken me around the world. I was involved in conferences because of the involvement with the PCC back in the UK in the mid-90s. I'd attend conferences, and it was the usual thing. You go along, you have an opportunity to share something with the audience, and then they thank you. They give you a pot plant, they give you a bottle of wine, and off you go, which was great. And that continued for so many years. And when I was here in New Zealand, one of my colleagues said, so Elias, we're talking the same conference. And he said to me, do you get paid? I said, paid? Bottle of wine, pot plant, that. No. He says, do you get paid money, as in cash money? I said, cash money? This is interesting. He said, well, there's this industry, it's called professional speaking. And that's when I got introduced to the concept of professional speaking, which took me literally all over the world. I've spoken in 13 countries across 4 continents. And it was actually during a speaking tour, that I was flying from London Heathrow in the UK all the way to Chicago in the States on that fateful day.
Before we get there, Elias, and I want to get there for sure, when you decided to become a professional speaker, what were the topics? What did you say, I'm going to talk about this or that? How did you decide that? Curious.
Great question. If I said it was the toss of a coin, I'd be lying. If I said I had this big revelation, I'd be lying. I think it was just a case of I was so egotistical at the time. I just was happy to be in front of an audience. the honest truth be told. But over time, I realized that it was leadership that I wanted to talk about, either building trust with groups. And I spent a lot of time working on a whole analogy of how to build trust, how to become a trusted advisor. And that was driven out of my experiences in sales. In sales, you can be one of two extremes. You can be a commodity supplier, or you can be a trusted advisor. And think about this. When you have a commodity, one of the biggest commodities we have today is a cell phone. So if you take a cell phone, the cell phone provider, depending on the geography you're in, will offer you a service for a certain price. The reality is that almost every supplier has a similar plan at the low end of the marketplace, where there's a lot of churn. People come along, they're looking for the cheapest, simplest one that they can get hold of. And a couple of years, maybe a couple of months later, they'll swap it for another one that's even cheaper. Then you go to the other extreme. And I was working with an organization that managed the top 24 customers in our company that were billing $450 million a year.
Oh, goodness.
When you have that intensity of a few customers, dealing with was effectively 25% of our global revenue, you have to understand that suddenly you've got to be there for your clients. You can't just be a commodity supplier. You have to be a trusted advisor. You have to understand what they need, how they tick, what their plans are for the next 5 years, so you can develop a roadmap to match into that to help them grow their business.
That's excellent. But you didn't come out of the gate with that. That evolved, right? That evolved over time. That's a fantastic thing to talk about. And what a wonderful profession. Tell me this. I have one more question about that. Do you ever get nervous when you stand in front of the crowd?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I think that if you aren't nervous, you're too arrogant and you can set yourself up for failure. I always say that you spend probably an hour practicing for every minute you're delivering. So if you think about this, an hour-long keynote will take you 60 hours to prepare and to develop and to practice and to perfect. And the nervousness is there all the time. And if I'm not nervous, I'm going to get really worried.
Right. I'm so happy you said that. I enjoy public speaking. I always have. I enjoyed being in front of a crowd. I don't know what it is. I feel really at ease and at home with it. But when I step up, I'm just seconds before I have that nervousness. And when I explain that to my kids that I'm nervous and stuff, they can't believe it. They say, how can you possibly be nervous? I said, it's a good thing. You want to be nervous. You want to have that little bit of edge. I'm so glad you said that. So anyway,
it's funny, I'm thinking about something. I traveled a lot around Canada speaking in the sales side as well. And one time when Keynote introduced the ability to change the slides using your iPhone, it just reminded me, Elias, of the time when it was working perfect in practice, but when I got up on stage, I was nervous and my hands started to sweat. Well, these surfaces don't work very well. So it was a bit of a pain. Anyway, I just remember that scenario. Sorry, Alan, I cut you off.
No trouble. I'm sure we all have those moments when something went terribly wrong. Go ahead.
Well, actually, let's talk about that, because I think that's an important element about what makes you the individual, the person that you are. So let's go back to our days in the UK, the PCC, the personal communication computer. We used to do demonstrations of the product. And we had a couple of people, one at either end. And I remember being at our training headquarters in the UK. And the company I worked for, Olivetti, an Italian-based IT company, had brought over all of their managing directors from the region. So we had about 13 or 14 managing directors in the room. And they said, Elias, can you please quickly come in and demonstrate this? And so we're doing this and we're doing the demonstration. And one of my colleagues says, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we record this so we've got a copy of this available for the future? And as we're doing it and we're connecting into the other person, he decides to connect a video cable to the back of the PC. And all of a sudden, poof, it goes fades to black.
Oh my God.
I think to myself, oh, this is not good. I'll say, oh, crud. I think that was the word, but maybe a different one was chosen. And then I thought, okay, what do you do now? So I looked at the audience. I said, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, this is just a standard PC. And I'm going to show this and demonstrate by switching it on for you now so you can see the whole thing boot up. But I think you've got to learn how to think on your feet.
Right.
And that's part of the resilience message that I got to learn by experiencing it myself. I don't think we go out of our way to say, hey, can I be resilient today? No, you just find things that make you resilient and get you through.
100%. And then learn from them, right? And learn from those things and put them in your toolbox. So the next time that something like that happens, I always reflect on one of my favorite moments most recently was Elon Musk standing up with the Cybertruck, throwing the ball at the side of the glass to show how resilient it was, strong it was, bulletproof, and it breaks the glass. But he didn't, he just kind of shrugged and, it moved on. And it was just, it showed me that you just got to think quick on your feet and you have to become, and you're right, become resilient, reach into the toolbox and figure out how do I get through this? Okay. Great conversation around public speaking. And I love it. And I know Jerry's passionate about it as well. And I could talk about this for hours. I want to talk about now you're on a plane. Where are you flying from where to where? You're heading off to do what? And what airline? Tell me all about it.
So it started off as an ordinary Tuesday, to be honest, except for a wardrobe malfunction. I was at my parents' house in Wimbledon, South London, and I was just packing to go on that flight when I suddenly realized I hadn't packed a tie. Now, you might turn around and say, Elias, really, tie? That's not a wardrobe malfunction. But 20 years ago, it was, because we were flying business class. You're expected to be, dressed up in a certain way. So I gave my mum a kiss, my dad a hug, as the taxi driver put my bags into the back of the cab. And he drove me to Heathrow Airport in London, in England. And the first port of call was to go and find the tie rack. I needed to find a tie to wear. So I got that on and put it through. And then I went through to the United Airways guest lounge. And I just sat there, very comfortable place, a lovely place to sit and relax before you had your boarding call. But maybe I should give a little disclaimer, because I was actually focused on one thing and one thing only. That was to write and complete a report that I had to send back to the office. I was on my way as part of a speaking tour. So I was trying to figure out, how can I fit this into my schedule? I thought, I know, I'll be able to do that on the airplane. So on the airplane, we arrive. I go to the front of business class, and there's a chap who's sitting in the window seat. I'm sitting in the aisle seat. And he would have started his journey, I'm guessing, about 36 hours earlier in India.
Okay.
So we look at each other and we give ourselves the customary business class greeting. I look at him, I go, He goes, huh? And that was it. So you're in there, you're on this plane, you're dressed up for the part, and I'm doing my report. And halfway through the plane and the journey, they interrupt my work by giving me lunch. I mean, how inconsiderate are those United Airways staff? But I put away my laptop. I get out my table, use it for its new purpose of hosting my food instead of my laptop. And after the food had gone and I'm back working on, that's when my world changed. I think for all of us, it changed in an instant. And for us, the only notification we had was when Captain Mike Ballard, the pilot for United Airlines Flight UA 929, turns around and says, ladies and gentlemen, can I first reassure you, there's nothing wrong with the aeroplane. However, there's been a significant incident in the US. And as a result, Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA, has shut down all airspace, and we've been asked to divert to Newfoundland in Canada. And my first thought was, where's that?
We've heard that before.
So what was going through your mind, Elias? Like, what were you thinking was happening in the US? And did you think, oh, this will clear up in a few hours? What will be going through your mind?
Well, the first thing that went through my mind, Alan, was that the president of the USA had been assassinated. Mm-hmm. And that was quickly swapped with a second thought. And that second thought was possibly there was nuclear attack onto US soil. That's when I craned my neck to look past my fellow business class passenger and out the window. Thankfully, couldn't see any mushroom cloud. But we didn't understand until we had landed in Gander some 30 minutes later, one of 38 planes that came there. And the BBC World Service was piped in that we understood. But as you said, Alan, I was probably in denial. I thought, short layover, we'll be back in the sky shortly. I've got this conference I have to deliver, and I've got the report I have to write. Let's just get on with it. Yeah. 24 hours later, we're still in the plane, on the tarmac, running out of food, running out of water. It ain't a pretty sight.
No.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that. That experience. I know what it's like to be stuck on a plane for a couple of hours while lightning goes through or a snowstorm passes or de-icing, and it's miserable. A couple of hours is miserable to be stuck on the tarmac. What's that like, that experience?
Well, for us, it would have been a really horrendous experience if it wasn't for Captain Mike Ballard and the crew at United Airlines. They started off by really reassuring me. And as I think of the experience with Mike Ballard, I think also of a more recent experience I've had with my own son. So the similarities will pan out in a moment, if you humor me. I remember being in a business meeting in town here in Auckland, again, an ordinary Tuesday, and when my cell phone started to vibrate in the middle of the meeting. So I thought, ignore the call. It was a text message from my wife, which I then saw at the end of the meeting. And it said, "Are you free this Arvo to meet up with Daryl?" Now, my wife was, the Daryl in question was the principal of my kids' school. And it's never a good sign when your principal calls you in. And I'm going through the mental checklist. Okay, which one of my kids is it? Can't be the older two. They're adults living in Christchurch. My youngest daughter, no, she's graduated high school, she's at university, just leaves my son. So then I'm thinking, okay, was it a fight? Was there blood? Did he win? And when I got through and found out, it turns out that my son was being distracted through his smartphone. And the teachers brought it to the attention of the headmaster, and they helped us to put together a plan of how we were going to help him to control his use of his cell phone. Mm-hmm. By the time we came home that evening and we had a meeting, my wife, my son, myself, I decided to use the following 3-point framework. And the first thing I said to my son is, you're not in trouble. The second thing is, we're here to help. And the third thing is, we believe in you. Mm-hmm. And I think these three things were what I experienced through Captain Mike and the crew. They said, first of all, there's nothing wrong with the airplane. You're not in trouble. They said, we're here to help. They told us to follow the instructions to get us safely landed. And then we believe in you. They're making sure that we were safe and we were looked after. And that whole experience expanded beyond that 24 hours on the plane to actually getting into Gander, which we all know woke up that morning 9,300 for breakfast, yet ended up 16,000 for supper. Where's the emergency plan to do that? People had to go and raid their pantries. They had to empty their fridge, their freezer to come and feed us. And we felt that we had come home because honestly, the hospitality was second to none.
Elias, that is a great 3-point framework. And what a way to de-escalate a tense situation, right? To just take it easy. Everybody's okay. That's a great way to articulate how you experience that and how they put you at ease so easily. So you're on that plane. I'm sure that experience was long, drawn out, not great. But as you say, they kept it pretty level for you. You crack open the door, you get off the plane, and you walk onto Newfoundland soil. Do you remember your first interaction with a Newfoundlander? Tell me about that.
The very first one was actually going through security. That's the memory that I have closest in my mind. And when you went through security, you had to understand at that point, they were still unsure if there were some other terrorists around.
Yeah.
So you had to fire up your laptop, prove that it worked, etc. But I felt that even though it was an obligation to do this, I wasn't being criticized about it. So I felt again that there was a level of Newfie hospitality that came through from that very first connection. And the guy was very civil about that. I mean, some people who are in security in different airports that I've experienced over my lifetime have been less than civil. But it was very civil. And then the next thing that we saw was literally plates of food. You have to understand, 24 hours on the plane. This was 20 years earlier. I was 30 kilos heavier and I had hair. So, we were hungry by that stage, looking for something to eat. And there was KFC, there was Subway. It was superb. And that was, again, people smiling at us, people making us welcome. I've understood, and I've documented this in the book, Leading from the Stop, where when we analyze what happened, the Newfies had to become almost counselors to us because we hadn't seen anything. We just heard the BBC World Service. We were asking them questions about what had happened. And they were just wrapping their arms around us and saying, hey, fella, it's okay. You're safe. We'll look after you. And now jump onto a bus.
Right. And where did that bus take you?
Bus took us about 40 minutes journey to Gambo.
Okay.
And we ended up being hosted by the Salvation Army. And I've got to say, the Salvation Army, the Sallies, God bless them, they welcomed us. And another fellow plane person, Bob Smith, originally from the UK, wrote a little article straight after 9/11, which we've got on our website, ua929.org. And on that, he said, when we arrived, this lady, Teresa, we later called her Mother Teresa, kept on greeting everybody saying, welcome, welcome, welcome. He thought, what does she mean? And then he figured it out. She meant welcome. And that was it. It was that feeling of, what's the Spanish phrase? Mi casa es su casa. My house is your house. And we felt that that was our home. Now, you have to understand, we've been, 24 hours on the plane, another 4 hours flying beforehand. And now I was at the Salvation Army. They were very hospitable. There were pews and people were just laying on the pews in the sanctuary. The Red Cross brought in some stretchers for us to sleep on. But I still had my tie on because I was convinced that I was going to be going back on a plane, back on a bus, going round. So after about 4 or 5 hours at the Sallies, I finally decided time to take my tie off and put it away. So still in denial, but getting better all the time.
You're a true business traveler. You didn't want to lose that tie the whole way through.
Hey, look, when you bought it and, your account is going to, be tax deductible, you got to make use of it.
So the folks you met in Gambo there, tell me a little bit about some of those folks.
Look, they were lovely. I remember sitting there towards the end of the first day that we were at the Sallies. And probably close to midnight, I decided, you know what, instead of going to bed, let me grab my laptop from the room that I was staying in and take it up to the hall where I can just sit there and work on my report. So at that stage, close to midnight, there's only 2 people in the hall, myself and an elderly lady, probably in her mid-60s. Knitting needles in hand, just minding her own business, knit one, purl one. And she's sitting relatively close to me. And then she walks over and she says, so how are you? And I thought, yeah, I'm okay. And then she starts asking questions about my family. Are you married? Do you have kids? And that sort of questioning, to be honest, was irritating me because I wanted to work on my report.
Yeah.
Not realizing that what the Sallies had done is that they had introduced members of the congregation to be there 24/7. You never know. Today we call it PTSD. When you go through a crisis, sometimes it affects you in a different way. And she was there just to literally love on me, to be there, to listen to me, to talk to me. She brought out photos of her 4 grandkids. And that's when I suddenly started to realize, Elias, maybe you don't have to write that report after all. Maybe you can shut your laptop down. Maybe you can just go back to what John was telling me 26, 27 years ago. Focus on people. Mm-hmm. And I think of a Larson cartoon where you have the Far Side cartoonist has this image of 2 cows sitting cross-legged, one on top of the hill, one sitting down below looking up at the second cow. And the cow's like a guru cow. And he says to his fellow student, he says, as you travel on life's highway, remember every now and again to stop and eat the roses.
I like that.
That's great. So you stopped. You talked to that lovely lady from Gambo?
She was beautiful. Honestly, we had maybe 45-minute conversation. It was nice to be able to just not think about things. I had on the airplane, failed to mention this before, it took me 3 hours to get a line out on the airphone that we had just to get hold of my wife in New Zealand. So 3 hours to get to a loved one. It took me maybe half an hour to get hold of my parents in the UK, let them know I was okay, and some family in the US. That was easier to get hold of than it was to get hold of my wife. But I think that people understood that when you're in this trauma, and this is where the Newfies were so generous. They turned around and they said, let's put some phones in here. Let's give you internet access. And don't even think about it. Don't even pay us for it. Just use it. Bob Smith, fellow passenger, said that when I interviewed him for the book, he said, I had that horrible job of being the phone monitor. And people were given just a 2-minute slot on. And each time it came up to 2 minutes, I had to go up and say, sorry, you got to shut your conversation down. But the fact that you could reach out to people, you could say, hey, I'm healthy, I'm safe. Are you okay? How's everybody else back home? That was so important to have people who then eventually opened up their own homes to us so we can go and have a shower there, have a cup of tea, just become more normal, because all we had was our carry-on luggage. And when you're in your suit, shirt, no tie, for 4 days, something has to give.
So did you go to somebody's house, take a shower? Tell me about that. Who were those folks?
Gosh, I wish I knew the names of the people. They're a lovely, lovely couple. We went there. So by that stage, we had organized little tours. So a car would come along, pick up 3 or 4 of us from the Sallies and go to that person's home. We'd just take a turn to have a quick shower. When you're having a shower, you're just getting yourself refreshed. The others were having a cup of tea and maybe a scone or a biscuit or something. But I remember at the time, they had the TV on, and I hadn't watched a lot of TV. I'd seen it initially on the first day at the Sallies, but after that, I refused to watch any further TV. I think it was the CNN who were, at that stage, they were sharing the messages left on people's home phones. And that was what was very hard for me to listen to, because it got me thinking, what would I have said if I had to leave a message for my loved ones at home? Right. And that was the hardest thing for me. The hospitality was lovely, but the emotional conflict was there.
Yeah. Elias, watching it unfold as most of the world did on television, many people, and I think most people, knew that the world was not going to be the same. You could almost tell in the moment that things were going to be different after this. There was something about it. You could just feel that, in the air. What was it like for you? When did you know that things were not going to be the same? What moment?
I think pretty much when we heard the BBC World Service piped in, that's when we knew the world had changed. And it was that instant. People, I'm sure, in New York City, around the world, who'd seen the images of the planes crashing would have got that even clearer at an earlier point. But here's the interesting thing. As we looked at that and the world changed, what happened in that instant? In that instant, the airline industry just crashed. The tourism industry in New York City evaporated. The conference industry that I was involved with stopped. Right. Sorry, did I say 9/11? Because I could have said global financial crisis, I could have said COVID, I could have said Delta. They all cause us to stop at some point in time, but we still managed to get through that.
Right.
And that's the message that I really want to bring back to people, a message of hope, to say, we got through this in the past. As I was sitting there a year ago in level 4 lockdown here in New Zealand, when everything came to a grinding stop,
right,
I thought, how do we lead from the stop? And leading from the stop is important, that we learn the lessons from the past, apply them to today, so we can then start living for tomorrow, because I guarantee tomorrow something else will come up that will cause us to stop again.
Right. Yeah, it's a sine wave, isn't it? We go from event to event to event, and it's how we come out of them that really defines us, I think, right? It's not the event that defines us, it's how we come out of them and how we then evolve as a society, and how we treat one another coming out of these events. You're right. Well, we're in the middle of one now, I would argue. We're in the middle of one now, and we're starting to see divisions of people and stuff. And we've got to calm ourselves and come out of this stronger than we went into it, and not allow it to define us, for sure. That's a great analogy. Tell me before we get into what you're doing in the moment and what's over the horizon for you, tell me your fondest memory of Newfoundland. When you close your eyes and you think back to Gambo and to Gander and all the people you met, what's your fondest memory?
I think the fondest memory had to be a picture was taken of what we call the Escape Committee. A Dutch guy called Monty pulled us all together, because we found out on our second day of the 4 days we spent with the Sallys, we found out that there was going to be a funeral the following day. How do you go and take 198 people, make them disappear? It's the biggest magic act of our lives, because we were literally in the sanctuary on the pews. You had camp bed stretchers everywhere, blankets, whatever carry-on luggage. We had a couple of hours to tidy the whole place up, to give the family the dignity of saying a good farewell to their loved one. And when we have Monty sitting there, Monty used to get our attention through the use of a saucepan and a wooden spoon. And he used to clatter these together. And I had to have Bob Smith remind me, he said, that bloody spoon. He got our attention. And it's things like that, that suddenly in the middle of this travesty, in the middle of this horror, you can still find something to smile about. You can still find something to laugh about. If I had another memory, it would be Julian Dawson, a fellow passenger from the UK, who was on his way to Tennessee to record an album, coming and entertaining us. And then the Newfies coming out with, is it Ugly Stick?
Ugly Stick, yeah.
I mean, these are memories you cannot buy.
No, that's right. And of course, the Ugly Stick makes a big appearance in the Come From Away play, for sure. That's right.
Yep.
Wow. So, Elias, what are you doing now? What are you doing as we speak? What keeps you occupied?
Well, look, I thought that I was going to be working locally. And back in the 1st of January, 2019, I found myself in New York City. I was the president of the Global Speakers Federation, and I was spending about a week and a half every month away overseas, away from my family. And that morning, my wife, my kids had flown from New York to Orlando. I was following them the following day. So I thought, what will I do my spare day here in New York? So I ended up having lunch with some fellow Kiwis, and I was asked the question, what's your goal for 2019? And I said my goal was to work locally. Now, I thought locally meant Australasian in Australia, New Zealand. And then as 2019 progressed, I thought maybe it's just New Zealand. And as 2020 was coming towards the horizon, I thought maybe it's just Auckland.
Auckland.
It's my home. But now, Alan, I'm finding myself back into the speaking circuit. I'm now reinvigorated to go back out there and share this message about leading from the stop, and then helping to positively impact 1 million households around the world with this message of hope and of resilience and leadership to help people come through this and future crises going forward.
Wow. That's honorable work right there.
No kidding.
Yeah, that's honorable work right there. So that's quite a horizon. That's quite a goal to shoot for. And the way you speak, it's beautiful. I can just listen for hours. The cadence and everything. It's a wonderful. You have a way of telling a story and keeping people engaged. Clearly, you're a pro at this, but your messaging is fantastic. Elias,
I got a question before you go. Well, do you worry, Elias, that, that saying, stop and eat the roses, do you worry that you may be getting away from that again? Now that you have an incredible message, but with a beautiful message like this comes requests, like 2 guys from Newfoundland. I know you did a CBC interview recently. How do you manage your time and stay in the moment, I guess?
Well, let me take you back to, and I'll close with this as the final 3 things that I've learned also from this experience. The first thing is to take control of yourself first. And by that, you've really got to ask for help. You've got to be willing and able to today reach out and ask for help. So I've got to look after me first. And once I do that, the second thing is to build and expand your community. And I've got to then look out for others. So I'm spending my time also looking for people that I'm working alongside to make sure that they're okay. That's what I learned from the newfies in my first time around. But then the third thing, which is the most important thing, is to change the rules. Change the rules. I mentioned this before about relaxing and going out and speaking, smelling and eating the roses. I look at my weather app on the phone and I say, what's the weather like tomorrow? I have all these requests to come and fit things in. I want to go and make sure that I get 10,000 steps in. So when is it going to be best in terms of weather? Is it going to be less rain in the morning or in the afternoon? Can I fit this in around my schedule and make sure I've got that? And previously, the 20 year ago, Elias would not have done this. He had just focused on working all the way through at the expense of his family, at the expense of his health. But today, I'm really trying to say, hey, make this a priority. Look after yourself first, Elias. Look after your team, and then change the rules.
Does that come with age? That sense of enlightenment and you know what I mean? Because I feel, and I know Jerry as well, it's the same with us. Like, we now understand the importance of making sure you carve time out for yourself to get yourself strong and healthy and mentally in the game, so that you can then provide that same service to your family and to your friends and the like. Does it come with age? It must come with age, because it's hitting us at the same time.
For sure. The phrase I love to, the older I get, the wiser my father becomes, because he was telling me this.
Yeah, right. That's a great expression. Yeah, because I'm the same way, Elias. 20 years ago, put a candle in front of me, I want to burn it from both ends. Right now, I want to burn that candle from the top down. Right. Well, that's great, Elias. What a wonderful conversation, and a real pleasure to meet you and to listen to you talk. And the topics were fascinating for me here today. We always ask our guests to leave the audience with one piece of advice. Here's a guy, you've had a great journey. I mean, you've starting in Libya, into the UK, around the globe, working in business, starting your own professional speaker. what would that one piece of advice be to the audience?
The one piece of advice I give them is to walk slowly through the crowd. So if you're going to be running around doing your bits and pieces, slow down, observe people around you, and just take in the moment.
Wow. Now I have to tell you, we've had 50 odd guests on with all a piece of advice each. Some give us two. They get inspired and give us a couple. I've never had walk slowly through the crowd, but I can tell you that's great advice. Jerry, what are your thoughts?
I just am in awe of the experience. Just listening to you, Elias, I can't wait to meet you. I have a feeling that's going to happen. Alan and I have put together something here out of an incredible passion. And the fact that I, out of the blue, sent you a note and you said, yes, I will do this, is exciting for us. Yes, we have a shared commonality with Newfoundland and your experience, but and I think about the similarities, from a business development and sales side. I just really, I didn't get enough here tonight, this morning for you, tonight for us. So I look forward to, you coming back and potentially, following up on some of this.
Look, I'd love to do that. And from my experience in the Middle East, they say that when you go and visit someplace, if you leave something behind, it's a sign that you've got to go back. I'm pretty sure I left a T-shirt behind there back 20 years ago. So it's my reason to come back and visit you guys.
But you didn't leave your tie. You took that with you.
Yeah, I took the tie, but I lost it. I don't know where it is now. I must have thrown it away. What a shame.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what another wonderful edition of Gale Force Winds. It's fascinating to talk to people that have had a wonderful journey. They've got a great outlook on life. Optimism is oozing from Elias. You can feel his passion for life. And I tell you this, I sure am glad that he touched his foot on Newfoundland soil and Newfoundland became a part of his story, because he has a way of telling a story that's inspirational. I have to tell you, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on Gale Force Winds with us here tonight. But I'm going to leave the audience with my own piece of advice, and that is, and it's genuine, and I mean this, the world needs more Elias Kanaris.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Winds. That's Gale Force Winds, WINS.com.